services network that has been centered in Ward 1 for so long for Latino residents. We're starting to see that. We know that the LEDC will move to Ward 4. Thank you very much. We know that IUTA is in Ward 4, and we'll know that we have to spend some time making sure we recreate that social service network for all of our citizens. But it hasn't been easy over the last couple of years, and we want to make sure that we turn our attention to making sure that happens. When I hear from Latino residents, I hear a lot of the same concerns, frankly, that I hear from African Americans as well. You know what that is? Gentrification. They're very scared of being displaced from their homes, and they've had that experience. They've had that experience already in the District of Columbia. So when we think about how we're transforming our neighborhoods with new retail and new housing, I'm heartened to hear what Jim has to say about making sure we have affordability. And we need to make sure that that happens, because that hasn't happened everywhere. And we got to draw the line, because we don't want our Latino residents, just like we don't want anybody else, displaced out into wards 9 and 10. We want them to have a home in Ward 1 and Ward 4. And so we've been proud over the last couple of years, for example, when we had the opportunity to build new housing on Missouri Avenue, to make sure that VITA had the opportunity to build right here in Ward 4. Had the opportunity just today to visit with Centronia, all these little 3- and 4-year-olds. And you know, the only thing that we despaired about Centronia on Upshur Street was that it wasn't big enough, and there wasn't enough room for infants. And we know that we need those spaces for infants as well. So I agree wholeheartedly with Jim that housing, but more than housing, what people really want to say is, we want to have a home here in DC. We support development, but don't forget about us and don't leave us behind. Social service network is important as well. In public safety, frankly, we want to make sure that we're addressing public safety issues. Too often, our Latino residents are victims of crime, and we want to make sure they're victims of crime on the street. They may be victims of crime in their own homes. And we want to make sure that our social service network is extending to everybody. I'll say this too. Education, education, education. And I know Jim agrees with me on this. But we are able to really work with Latino leaders, Latina leaders, especially in the schools. When I look at my cadre of ANC commissioners and civic leaders, I want to make sure I see Latinos in leadership, because I know that that is when we're going to advocate the best for those kids. When I look at Powell Elementary School, for example, a school that is on the right track with a dynamic principal, I know that this government should be doing more to invest in a school just like that, so our Latinos are excelling and thriving at school and turning to more jobs. So let me say this about jobs and a living wage. We all want a living wage, right? And we all want to create jobs. And we all want the investments that we've been able to have in Columbia Heights. We want it in Brightwood. We want it in Skyland. And we want it on New York Avenue. We want it, especially for our ward, we want it at Walter Reed. So let's talk about how we can have a fair discussion about extending the wage discussion, not just to Walmart or Wegmans or Macy's or Target or Lord & Taylor's or Harris Teeter or a lot of the retailers that we want in the District of Columbia. Let's talk about that person who is caring for a senior citizen at one of our nursing homes. We want a living wage too. Let's talk about the person who's doing landscaping all across the District of Columbia. Well, they want higher wages too. So I think that we are certainly people who all care about the District of Columbia can agree that we need to extend this conversation.
Thank you. My name is Mario Asensio, and I want to give you a warm bienvenidos. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm going to start my question with Councilmember Graham. Ward 1 has lost much of its economic diversity rental expenses for market rate housing are beyond the reach of many Latinos. And many single-family homes are being subdivided into apartments too small for most families. Finally, most newly constructed apartments, even the so-called affordable ones, are almost always too expensive for low-income families. DC government concentrates its support for low-income housing in the eastern part of the city. What will you do to encourage more family-oriented, low-income housing in your ward?
Well, I'm going to agree with part of what you said and disagree with another part of it, because we have been determined. Should I say that? I can still say that. All right. We have been determined to preserve, not only preserve, but rehabilitate extremely low-income housing in Ward 1. And so along the 14th Street corridor, there are 3,000 apartment units for extremely low income that we have not only preserved, but we've rehabilitated each and every one of those apartments. And if you go from W Street all the way up to Oak, you will find these buildings. We have also built some new extremely low income affordable housing. Victory Housing has a senior center right on top of the Metro at Irving and 14th Street, Victory Housing. And so we're doing our part. You know, I think when you get to two issues, we have to do more. And this is where I agree with you. Number one, there is an extremely low percentage, I mean a staggeringly low percentage of Latinos in public housing. I have never understood that. I don't know why it is. I don't know why our public housing has 2%, 3% Latino. I don't know why it is, but we need to change that. And that's one of the issues that we have to deal with in a very serious way. In addition to that, though, we've got $100 million that Mayor Gray put into the Housing Production Trust Fund in the next fiscal year. A couple of monies from this fiscal year. And that's a huge, huge bounce for affordable housing in the District of Columbia. We have got to continue to be determined to, again, serve the needs of extremely low-income persons and also people who are ordinarily not included in affordable housing. To that, we have good programs on rent supplement, we have rapid rehousing, we have other programs that are aimed at this very same purpose. So I think the city is doing quite a lot. When you get to the single-family residence, I keep looking for a time clock, but when you get to the single-family residence, in very many cases, this is the wisest investment that people ever made in their lives, buying these houses. You know, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, it is next to impossible to turn to them and say, we're sorry you paid $50,000 for this row house on 13th Street. You can't sell it for $500,000 today. It can't be done. And so some of this housing of necessity is being lost, which otherwise would have remained low income, because the owners want to sell, they want to retire, they want to go to Arizona, whatever they want to do. And that's a huge challenge for Ward 1 and every ward of this city, what to do with the single-family residences. So I have more thoughts on that, but let me stop and give Councilmember Bowser an opportunity. This is an interesting mayoral forum. Where are the other mayoral candidates? Is it just you and me tonight?
I think Jim's just
Well,
announced.
and if I could just add, this is you're welcome to stand or you're welcome to sit. This is a friendly conversation, so go at home. Feel like you're at your casa.
Tu casa, mi casa.
Councilmember Bowser, we are beginning to see the same trends in Ward 4. Please tell us what you will do about these problems.
Well, we have this approach. First of all, we're very aggressive about preserving the units that we have. And I think Jim is exactly right. And I may even have more single-family housing than there is in Ward 1 and Ward 4. And part of the way to keep housing affordable is to keep people in it. And we have a lot of senior citizens in our ward who have beautiful homes, some of them huge homes, and they're falling down around them. So we have to make sure we have great programs, first and foremost, tax policies that encourage people to be able to stay in their homes and make repairs. I'm pleased to have Jim's support in a recent measure that we passed at the council that would extend the number of people who will qualify for the senior citizens tax credit We are also successful in getting more money, more of that $100 million into single-family rehab. The other issue that we have, and Jim probably had this experience some years ago in Ward 1, and we are seeing it in Ward 4, where apartment buildings, old buildings, some of them in bad shape, some of them in pretty good shape, but all of them situated in beautiful communities, in Brightwood, sitting on 14th Street, just a stone's throw from Rock Creek Park. And some people in those units are paying $500, $600, you know, most $1,000 or $1,100. If they were to sell, they could probably get $2,000 in each of those units. So we need to figure out from the city to educate our population about when they're approached about their exercising their opportunity to purchase these buildings. Thanks to Jim Graham and a lot of smart people, we have some serious protections for tenants in our city. But without knowing how to use those rights, too many of our people are being abused and taken advantage of. So one idea that we have, and I haven't shared this with Jim yet, is to make sure we have some kind of, I call it in my mind, a TOPA college. So that means that tenants, when approached by folks, TOPA, you like that? LUC like that? TOPA college. But I want everybody to be educated about their rights so we don't have developers exploiting loopholes to take these buildings. So short answer, we have to preserve more units. And as we, the government, is involved with different projects, for example, I chair the Council's Economic Development Committee. We had a team come to us to talk about McMillan, not in my ward, but close by in Ward 5 and close to Ward 1, with only 10% of the units that would be, you know, workforce affordable housing, only 10%. We can do better, and we have to insist that when the government, our land, we don't have to sell our land, but if we do, we have to make sure that there's a long-term investment for our city. And that's also how we're approaching it at Walter Reed. We do know this, that the housing question isn't just one-sided. It's a second side to the housing question. We can create a lot of affordable units. But do you know how many people were on the public housing list when it was shut down? 70,000 people. You know that $100 million that Jim just talked about? We'll need that investment 9 straight years to get to 10,000 units that the mayor promised. So did you hear me? 70,000 here, 10,000 here. How are we going to close that gap? And we close that gap by helping our residents get the skills that they need to earn higher paying jobs. We do it by making sure that people that have fallen out of our workforce entirely, that we are educating them and getting them skills that they need to get a job. Guess what happens when you have two people working in the family? The income doubles. And so we need to concentrate also on the other side of the housing equation. More affordable units created and more people being able to afford them.
Continuing the conversation about affordable housing, we want to know whether the concessions that are given to developers in exchange for their commitments to provide affordable housing is having a positive impact on the communities that are being displaced, i.e., for example, in Columbia Heights. What data do we have that provides evidence that these funds directed to developers are really impacting needy communities?
Well, I'll start. The answer is there's not good data. And nobody likes it when I say that, but you know what? I've chaired the Economic Development Committee almost 6 months now. And I have asked the government to provide me with the contracts that we get into with these developers, just on like a handful of projects, 15 projects. And you know, that was probably 2 months ago, and I'm just now getting the last of the contracts. And so there is a lot of this going on in the government. Well, this one should do it, or that one should do it. This is the fact, however. There are a lot of projects that we see around the city that wouldn't happen but for some government involvement. And so I don't think that because we know that there are some problems with enforcement, that we should throw out the idea that the step up to the plate in some cases to make development happen. I'm very sensitive to this issue as well, and let me tell you why. Because this government has done a lot to develop the downtown. This government has invested a lot in developing the Southwest. This government, even to a lesser extent, has done a lot in parts of Ward 1, but nothing like we've done in parts of the city. Now, it's our turn in the parts of the city that don't have a lot of metro stations, that don't have a lot of daytime traffic, that are more the outskirts of the city. So if you tell me we need the government to invest downtown, I know for a fact that we're going to need the government to invest uptown. What we have to do, however, is be smarter about it, and we've done some things on the council to be smarter. For example, we now require the CFO to give us an analysis of the deal before we agree to a tax abatement or other subsidy. The next smart thing we're going to have to do is hold accountable the executive offices that are responsible for monitoring the delivery of units, or whether there's some other kind of concession. We often get concessions for park space or some other community use. We get concessions for affordable units that are outside of our planned unit development process. We need to make sure somebody's monitoring that. The third thing is we got to do our part. If we say developer, you got to provide affordable units, we, government, have to provide qualified people to buy them or rent them. And we're not doing a good job of that.
I've heard Muriel Bowser talk for several years now, 4 years, 5 years, but you're very good. This is the first time I've been out here and feeling the campaign, and it's good. It's good. I'm quite impressed, and I mean that very sincerely. But what was the question? Oh, I remember. I remember the question. The fact Muriel, Councilmember Bowser, is absolutely right. But I got to add something to this. I remember how excited we were when we had the first commitments to set aside for affordable housing. And some of that happened on Georgia Avenue, some of it happened in Columbia Heights, U Street. I mean, when the buildings went up on U Street, it was amazing. It was amazing to think, and it was pioneering, and people thought, my God, is this going to work? Is the Ellington going to work on U Street? Is the Roosevelt going to work on 16th Street when it was finally opened as market rate rental? I mean, it was very, very bold stuff. And so at that same time, when we were able to get set-asides, we were excited to get it, and we put them into place. What we didn't do was put into place legislation, which we sorely need, which I'd be glad to co-introduce with you, to make sure that all of the subsequent problems are dealt with. For example, there are people with low-income set-aside apartments in Columbia Heights who now face co-op or condo fees that they cannot pay. They face rent increases in rental buildings that they cannot meet. And so we haven't done enough to think about what's going to happen after we have the set-asides. But the fact that we have them, I got to say, we had them in this city before most other places in the United States of America. We had the commitment by the D.C. government, and here, if I may mention Adrian Fenton, because I think Adrian Fenton had a real commitment to making sure that we maintain. In Ward 1, you may have noticed us out, it's just by a few hundred Latinos who live in Ward 4. And certainly there's no question that we have the barrios in Ward 1. I mean, there's no Columbia Road in Ward 4. There's no Mount Pleasant Street in Ward 4. But the fact of the matter is, in Ward 1, we treasure our diversity. It is an absolute asset to what we do there. And the fact that, if I wanted to live somewhere everybody looked and acted like me, there are many, many, many choices in the metropolitan area. But I wanted to live somewhere where people didn't look and act like me, where they spoke different languages, they had different approach to life, they had different cultures, they had a different sense of what mattered to them. I wanted to find the common ground with those people, and that's why I moved from Ward 4. But I did. I did. I moved from the 1300 block like a Gallatin in Ward 4. To God's country, I'm just pulling you away. But Muriel Bowser, you've been terrific today. I hope you can stay longer. But we really do need to think about all the things that we have to do after we insist on affordable units being put into place. And we also have to think about affordability. I think somebody who makes $80,000 a year does not need a housing subsidy as much, I mean, they might like it, as much as somebody who's making $30,000 a year. And that's my mantra. I keep talking about those with extremely low income so that we can make sure that those people can live and work in our neighborhoods in the District of Columbia. Thank you.
We want to move to the area of employment, and this is an area that you have made reference to during your comments. But we have a series of questions that are very specific. The first one being, less than 2% of Latinos are employed by DC government. Yet, Latinos represent 10% of the residents in the District of Columbia. What do you think needs to be done to improve the recruitment and retention of Latinos at all levels of DC government? And what can you specifically do?
Well, I think, one thing is we have to respect the language. And, now, you never hear mention the Language Access Act, but when I authored the Language Access Act 10 years ago with a community group of supporters, it was, again, a very, very bold step. And the fact of the matter is we have to take people where they are, and if their language is best in Spanish, we've got to relate to them in Spanish. If it's Amharic, we've got to relate to them in Amharic. We've got to respect that kind of difference in the first place. But the second place, we've got to actively work with people so they know about jobs. I had an amendment to the Living Wage Act the other day, which was passed on the first reading, and I had an amendment which ensured that the knowledge about jobs in these big retailers and instructed the agencies who are involved in job placement and job development to monitor these jobs and then report to the council on just what happened in terms of people getting these jobs. If this is all about getting jobs for people who live in Mitchellville, I'm not very excited about it. I have enough people right here not right here, but in Ward 4 and Ward 1 that need these jobs. Yeah. And we've got to stand up to Congress for openers, and we've got to say we've got to have new laws that help protect our residents in this nation's capital. Thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Brown. The question was about in DC government.
Yes.
Jobs in DC government.
Well, it's the very same issue. It's the very same issue. Having people be aware of the jobs, assisting them in terms of their applications, and then respecting, their cultural and language differences. And I think that's what we need to do. But I already made the point about public housing. Why are there 3% of Latinos in public housing? But when we know the fact of the matter is that a great many Latinos live below the federal poverty level. These are issues that we have to tackle with your advocacy.
Well, I agree with Jim on a number of those points, and I think our government should look like our population. And I think certainly if I have the opportunity at the top, we're going to make sure that we have leadership that reflects our community. And we can't be scared to say that. We can't be scared to say that we want more Latinos to work for us. We can't be scared to say that we want more LGBT citizens to work for us, but we also have to have intentional policies to do that. I also think the Council of the District of Columbia should look like the city. And I bet you if you had a Latino you would have a different focus, and we would have to hold everybody accountable. But it is that time. It's about that time.
Well, you have a vacancy coming up in Ward 4.
Thank you. Well, speaking about that, you had mentioned at the beginning that Ward 4 now has the most Latinos And as we think about this, we may want to also look at your own staffs to see if maybe there's a case for a Latino there. So, Councilmember Bowser, 26% of Ward 4 residents are Latinos. With the increase in Latino residents in Ward 4, how do you plan to ensure that these residents have the means of making their concerns known to you and your staff?
And this is the issue certainly for 6 years that we've been trying to get to. And I can't tell you that I'm satisfied with where we are with making sure that we, like I said, recreated the network and really connected with a lot of the community leaders that can help us engage the network. So I think there's certainly more work that we can do. Our approach is to be out in the community all the time. Our approach is to be at ANC meetings and community meetings, and where we've had the most success, I will tell you, connecting with our Latino leadership is at schools and in housing. So we deal with a lot of housing issues and engage a lot of tenants associations during the housing process as well. So that is our approach, but if I had to put a number one priority on it would be how do we, that has been so successfully done in Ward 1 with the various social service agencies in that network, call it SWAT, SWAT. And so I think what I want to rename it is SWIFT, right? What is the acronym, Jim?
It's strengthening our communities.
SWIFT, strengthening Ward 4 together.
Yeah, well, what do you call the
Strengthening Ward 1.
Swifting Ward 1 together. So I think that would be our first priority is recreating that network. In some cases it can be duplicated, but I do think that a lot of the social service agencies need to be closer to where people live.
Well, can I just say something quickly?
Sure.
You know, for the very longest time in my office, I had the highest ranking Latino in the DC government. It's true. And it was Ted Losa, who was my chief of staff. And by the way, I just got a text from him. He was hoping to come here tonight, but he's had a surprise birthday party. But we would remark with each other, you know, how is this possible? And when we're talking about, you know, other elements of the DC government, how is it possible that it takes a ward council member to have somebody at his level working for them? And I see tonight we have Jacqueline Reyes. Jackie, widely loved and admired for her connections to the Salvadoran community particularly, but all Latinos and Latinos. And so I think, you know, in part it just takes a determination. Right after it just says, you know, I had a determination. I said I wanted my staff to have top-level Latinos working. And so you do it. And then all of a sudden people say, oh, it's possible to do this. But for years, I tell you, nobody else acted. And I think today in the government, we look to see high-ranking Latinos, not just in the Office of Latino Affairs. Roxana, are you still here?
She went to the campus.
She what?
She left already.
She left, but she does a great job. But not just in that office, but throughout the DC government. Jesus Aguirre is a good example of people who work really, really well. But there's just got to be a commitment to say, you know, we've got a lot of qualified people applying for a lot of jobs, but I want my office, I want my agency to look like the city. Thank you.
We are running out of time, but we do want to ask a question that's related to education. We would be sad if we couldn't ask this question. So according to data from OSSI, Latino youth have the lowest high school graduation rate in the District of Columbia. How do you plan to inform the thinking of the Council's Education Committee to address truancy and low graduation rates of Latino students?
Well, I think that when we address the graduation rates for all of our students, we're going to do a lot. And I will tell you this, and we had the opportunity to vote for a proposal recently that has to happen. In our city, we have the notion of equal funding for everybody. When I think we have to change the way we think about that. And we have to fund what children need. And that means that we're going to have to do more for schools and kids that are in more challenged settings. And it doesn't just mean throwing money at it. It just means transforming those schools, those seats, those programs, and those opportunities for those schools. And I think when children are entering programs where they're more engaged and have better programs and the whole school is working, then they're going to have a higher opportunity to graduate. What we know, however, and I'm a staunch supporter of school reform and doing it as fast as possible. And when we've had 6 years of experience, I think that we've done some things right and we've gotten some things wrong. But this is what I know. If we stay on the track that we're on, we're not going to get to where we want to be, 75% proficiency for 50 years. Now, what child in school can wait 50 years? What young family who's moving to the District of Columbia can wait 50 years? What person who bought a $700,000 house on Irving Street is going to stand to hear that they can't go to their neighborhood school and yet they can't get into Deal or Wilson? Not going to work, right? So if we're going to transform the opportunities for those kids, we have to accept that we're going to have to do reform faster. We're going to have to accept that we have 4,000 seats at least that we have to transform and make high performing. That's the only way that that young Latino at Roosevelt or Coolidge is going to be able to graduate. And more than that, that's the only way they're going to have a diploma that means anything. So if we have only 50% of our kids graduating, the other 50% are going to colleges, but they're not prepared to do the work. So we have to change that level of expectation. I think one way to do it is to make sure that we're funding children at the level that they need. And we're going to start there.
Let me just say, I'll be very fast. But I think part of the answer lies in the type of support we give to our children and the buildings that they're in. And I'm very, very proud of what we've done in Ward 1. Cardozo will open in a month, completely rehabilitated, $130 million. Parkview Elementary, known also as Bruce Monroe at Parkview, has gone through its first wave rehabilitation. Harriet Tubman is night and day different than it used to be. Bancroft, Adams are hugely improved. Marie Reed is on the list for all of this. The fact of the matter is that we have got to show this commitment throughout the entire city. Our charter school, we have more charter schools in Ward 1 per capita than I think anywhere in the world. And we're proud of our charter schools and all of what they contribute to us. And, the one other thing I want to say is that every elementary school in Ward 1, except one, have Latino populations 50 to 60% of the student body. Every elementary school. And that tells us what's coming up. That tells us what's going to go to the high schools. That tells us what we need to expect. And the fact that we have English, Spanish schools in increasing numbers, both as charters and public schools. I think we've turned the corner. Pre-K, thank you, Vince Gray, for all of the pioneering work that you did on pre-K programs, which is making a huge difference. Let me conclude, if I may, off the question by saying just how pleased I am that Muriel Bowser is running. Because, when I listen to you tonight and I hear your energy and your intelligence and your commitment to the people of the District of Columbia, it gives me a very, very good feeling. And again, this is my first, this wasn't a campaign. Was this a campaign? It wasn't a campaign, but it felt very good being here with you and hearing you speak so eloquently. Can we have a round of applause for you?
I know that Councilmember Bowser has more engagement, so we want others to also benefit from her wisdom at another event. So we want to thank her for a round of applause, please. Thank you so much.
All right, it's a little warm back. I know. Hey, thank you.
All these lights.
Good to see you.
We're going to give you some more water.
Okay, folks, but thank you so much, everybody, for coming out. Some of the questions that you all had were combined with the questions you all heard, so I think we have one at a time. If anybody wants to use the discount. And we thank you very much again for being with us, and we thank the people online who also were able to take part in the forum. Thank you very much. Señor, oh, gracias.